Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the Don't Get Last Guillotine podcast. I'm your host, Joe Harris, and with me today, unfortunately, we have no one. We were supposed to have, as you can see if you're watching on YouTube on the screen, we were supposed to have a good friend of the show, Cantaloupe, come on and talk to us about the AFC South, but he's had some storms in the area. He has no electricity. He has no internet. So it's going to be just me today, and hopefully we'll be getting him back to talk about the NFC East. But for now, it's just going to be me. Today's episode is sponsored by the like button. If you have access to a button that says like on your screen, wherever you happen to be consuming this podcast, I would appreciate it if you hit that button. That would be cool. That would be a fun time. Let's get into it, though. Let's talk about some AFC South. We'll go a little bit quicker on this episode today because the AFC South is just not good. This is not a good division for football. It's not a good division for fantasy football. Daniel Jones kind of encapsulates that. Daniel Jones is the guy who can be a guy, and we've seen him be a guy for 10 or so games last season. But he left us disappointed, and I fear that leaving us disappointed is somewhere we might find ourselves with the majority of this division. Daniel Jones is going at QB 25. He was doing very well before the injury, but ultimately this is not someone who you can draft to be a starter in a guillotine league, not remotely close. Not only was he kind of bad before he got injured against a couple of good defenses in Houston and Kansas City, but the stuff he was doing even well was not especially impressive, specifically leading the NFL in his first read target share percentage. 63% of the time when he dropped back, he threw it to the first read on the play. That to me says that the scheme is doing a lot more than what Jones was doing. And I worry that after defensive coordinators get an entire offseason to prepare, they might be able to take away some of the things that worked, especially given that one of the things that worked was Michael Pittman Jr., who was no longer on the team. And the last thing that worked for Daniel Jones that's no longer working is his right Achilles. And we can't just ignore that. He's probably going to struggle to drive off the back foot, to fire the ball downfield, to deliver the ball with pace, which is something we'll talk about a little bit more later with the receivers, but I don't think there's many people clamoring to draft Daniel Jones. So we'll move on to Jonathan Taylor, who had a over 10-point per game difference in wins versus losses. Now, some of that may have been because the losses were on a really bad offense led by either Phillip Rivers or Riley Leonard. So it's hard for us to have expected the losses to be very productive relative to the Daniel Jones losses where they at least performed a little bit better. The workload didn't change between wins and losses, which is pretty significant. That's not something you see very frequently among running backs. And so I'm pretty much fine with the RB5 spot. I have him ranked as my fifth running back to come off the board right behind those top three guys. Actually, he might be my fourth running back. I should have checked that before I hit the record button, but I'm not going to stop now. He was just a volume monster last season. He led the NFL in snap share, and even leading the NFL in snap share, he was still one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL. He was in the top 5 to 7 in most yards per carry, first downs created per carry, that sort of stat. He is my top pick right after the CD Lamb line that I've talked about on a few other shows. Basically, the top 3 running backs and top 4 receivers that after that I feel there's a bit of a fall off for. I think Jonathan Taylor bridges that gap pretty well. And also importantly, we'll talk briefly about him later, but his handcuff is absolutely free if you're drafting in sleeper leagues right now, which I've most of my guillotine leagues, technically they're chopped leagues, on sleeper. That's what I'm spending my last overall pick on, because DJ Giddens, the clear backup for him right now, isn't being drafted until you have to search to find him because he's ranked as the 2,900th best player. So little nugget also of just, even if you don't have Jonathan Taylor, if he's still on the board for your last pick, you should either scroll or search. You should probably search because that'll be faster. Get you some DJ Giddens. Let's, though, move on and talk about everyone's favorite breakout pick. There are a lot of breakout wide receiver picks happening in this division, but my favorite of the breakout wide receivers happening here is very much Josh Dobbs. And I talked a little bit about this with Akash on our last episode. Going at wide receiver 36, he had 13 points per game in 2024, and that dropped off big time last season. He lost 5 points a game, basically, both due to the addition of Tyler Warren, both, and also due to his own injury at the start of the season. So when the Colts were on fire to open up the year, he wasn't really able to be a part of that. And then because he was coming off the injury, it took him a while to get reacclimated. And then by the time that he was really ready to go, you saw the offense start to fall apart after the bye week, and a couple weeks after the bye, Daniel Jones was injured. Even so, Josh Downs was a capable separator and a capable receiver throughout the year. He averaged 1.1.5 basically yards of separation per target, which ranked 40th in the NFL. He was an even better man coverage beater, which is rare for someone who's a little bit undersized. It tends to be the downfield threats who are better at beating man coverage, but he was pretty open during those snaps, and I like the setup for him a lot because, as I talked earlier about Daniel Jones having trouble driving the ball downfield, I think that will set up pretty nicely for Josh Downs because he is a little bit more of the intermediate and short area guy, whereas Alec Pierce, who we'll talk about next, isn't all that. In addition to that, the offensive line has gotten a little bit worse. It's gotten a year older. They've lost a piece or two, and they haven't done much to replace it. And so that also would lead to getting the ball out quicker, getting the ball into guys like Josh Downs or Tyler Warren's hands. But the thing is, Tyler Warren is going all the way at tight end 4. He very rarely makes it outside the top 50 picks. You're getting Josh Downs at around the 80s, a little bit past, depending on where you're drafting. Love the value here on Josh Downs, even if he gets a little bit steamed up going into draft season. And that's partially because I'm really out on Alec Pierce. He is a situational start, I think. And we were successful talking about Alec Pierce last season as a situational start. I really liked playing him against defenses that played a lot of man coverage and a lot of single high safety looks. I want to say that the Steelers were the team that I particularly called out last season of like, this is the Alec Pierce breakout game. If it was ever coming, it was coming then. And it hit, and I felt really good because I had to start him in a league when I was in a tough spot, and he saved me. He was very efficient last season. He was 7th in fantasy points per target, and he's always been a good player in terms of fantasy points per target. Most people who have high ADOTs, high average depth of target, are going to see a positive trend in that. But even still, relative to other deep threats, the being second in yards target and second in yards per route are just really incredible. And it's rare to see something like that happen. I do think that there's upside for Alec Pierce. I think there's definitely room for me to be wrong about Alec Pierce. 5 of the 6 touchdowns last season came without Daniel Jones in the lineup. My only issue is he was a very up and down player. Early in the season, there was a little bit more stability, but also earlier in the season, there was no Josh Downs. And now there is a Josh Downs, but now there's also no Michael Pittman. There's a lot of moving parts happening. The offensive line was very good to start the season. Jonathan Taylor was on an absolute tear. He was drawing defenses in, and then he was able to take them out over the top. There's just a lot of question marks about the Indianapolis Colts offense, and I don't have the answer to them. I don't pretend to have the answer to them. Someone does. Someone has the Indianapolis Colts all ranked perfectly. I'm not going to pretend to be that guy. I like Josh Downs. The rest of them have more question marks than I'm comfortable with to be starting them week 1 on a Guillotine team. And before we get out of here on Alec Pierce, for those of you who are listening, which is the majority of you, so I should be better at talking to the people who are listening, his last 4 games of the season were just phenomenal, just incredible. 2.6 points against Seattle, 24 against San Francisco, utter goose egg against Jacksonville. And then naturally, he scored 29 points against the best defense in the NFL, the Houston Texans, only playing like 2/3 of the game. Alec Pierce, everybody. He's going to be a very fun guy to pick up off the waiver wire because someone else drafted him and started him, and he got one of those 4-point games, and it was rough. But then you have the ability, you've got the depth now. He's depth for you, basically. But you're not drafting him to be depth. You're drafting him to start, and that's the problem, especially with the injury that I didn't even talk about. He's got a groin injury. It's looking like he's going to start the season. If he doesn't start the season, then we'll talk a little bit about what happens if he doesn't start the season on our next slide. But for now, we'll talk very briefly about Tyler Warren, who's a really tough spot for me to rank because historically Tyler Warren going at tight end 4 right now, this is just not a place you want to draft tight ends. Upper middle rounds, you should, just looking at the last 10 years of fantasy football drafts, you should be taking running backs. You should be taking wide receivers. That's where you get big time breakouts like Jackson Smith and Jigba last year. I'm not going to try to test my fantasy knowledge and go back for that because I had a long day at work. I had to drive for 4 hours, and I'm looking out the window of my hotel right now, and I can see a large plume of smoke because there were explosions happening here. I'm in Tulsa right now. We'll move on from that. This is what happens when I don't have a guest. I get off topic too easily. We're going to get back to Tyler Warren, though. He was never below 4 targets, and I like that. He had a very solid floor. I think if you're drafting Tyler Warren, I know it says tight end 4. You want to think of Tyler Warren as a wide receiver. If you think he's going to score with relative similarity to the wide receivers on the board, and you prefer Warren to be a wide receiver effectively, then you click the Tyler Warren button. But the replacement level tight ends are just about as good as the replacement level wide receivers at this point. And so the positional advantage that has been talked about in years past in a Guillotine league at the middle of the road tight ends, it's not quite as strong. It's not someone like a Brock Bowers who you can talk yourself into this being like a generationally excellent player, or a Trey McBride last season who had a generationally good season. I don't think we see that sort of thing out of Tyler Warren. I just don't think the offense can support it, considering that he's not the best player in the offense. And generally when tight ends have that incredible season, Travis Kelce in 2022, they're the best pass catcher or the best skill position player, I should say, in the offense. And I definitely don't think that Tyler Warren is a better player than Jonathan Taylor. Still a good guy to have on your team if the tight end 4 falls outside of the top 50. You want to get him into the late 50s. If you're getting him in the 60s, you're getting a steal. But if you're drafting him in any round that starts with a 4, or God forbid a round that starts with a 3, you've probably reached too far on Tyler Warren. You've probably passed up really good players at valuable positions. Whereas if I've said it a lot, if your tight end sucks, your tight end sucks, and you're in the same boat as literally half your league. Everyone has a tight end that sucks. It's fine. Let's talk about the bottom of the barrel Colts. DJ Giddens, who I talked about earlier. This is a platform-dependent pick. Of course, he's going at RB77 over on Fantasy Pros, which I think that on its own is a really good value. He's probably the lone handcuff unless you believe in Seth McGowan or Ulysses Bentley the fourth. If Najee Harris signs there, which I think is possible, or if they trade for one of the Cardinals running backs, which I think is also possible, then DJ Giddens might become less of a smash pick. But right now, if you're drafting on Sleeper, you can get him for free, and you should probably do that. The same can be said of his teammate at wide receiver 137, so you can kind of get him for free anywhere. Nick Westbrook-Ikine, who I have taken as either a last pick or second to last pick a couple times now as well. doesn't show up on most boards, and I've checked that on a couple of different sites by now. With the Pierce injury, there's a chance Pierce doesn't start week 1. He might even be put on the PUP list. If that happens, Nick Westbrook-Akina is probably the wide receiver 2 here. It's between him and wide receiver 145, Deion Burks, who I like. He's a fun rookie name to know. Only remotely valuable if Alec Pierce misses time, which we don't know yet. And even if he does, I would much rather have Nick Westbrook-Akina, who I think is probably still starting for them in 3 wide receiver sets, even independent of an Alec Pierce injury. You can argue that there's value in taking Nick Westbrook-Akina. I like him as a late round pick just because of my philosophy on late round picks. It shouldn't be a guy like Deion Burks at 145. It should be more of a guy like Nick Westbrook-Akina, a veteran who we know isn't consistently good, but we've seen him be good in certain situations. And so if week 1 comes around and this is a situation where he's on the field a lot and Daniel Jones is looking his way, then we know he's worth rostering. And if we get 1 or 2 weeks into the season and he's not on the field a lot and Daniel Jones is not looking his way, you can cut him because you have a phenomenal waiver wire and there's way better people to pick up. Basically, anyone who you draft onto your bench is going to be cut at some point during the year. And so you want to draft people who you don't feel too bad about cutting. I also completely forgot to update the stats beneath these teams for those of you who are watching us. So not important. Let's move on. Talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars QB9 Trevor Lawrence, who is a very fun breakout call. And I don't blame you for saying he's a very fun breakout call. He finished the year on an absolute heater last season, even if you exclude his 6-touchdown game against the Jets, which it was cool, but I don't think it's remotely predictive of what he's going to do this season. He doesn't play the Jets, I don't think. And so I really don't care that he exploded against a team that had no desire to win football games, led by Brady Cook. And I love Brady Cook. Great guy. But not highly predictive of fantasy success. And I think there are too many people pointing to the 32 fantasy points per game number down the stretch. He was QB1 down the stretch. Yes, it was buoyed by a 45-point game. So you've got to take that with marginal grain of salt. He also followed it up with a 32-point game against the Denver Broncos, who had one of, if not the best defenses in the NFL last season. He rushed the ball a lot more than normal. We've seen this sort of come and go throughout his career. If it stays to start the year this year, I would be very excited about it. But this is a team that has a lot of different ways to spread the ball around. They've got a couple of running backs that people like. They've got several pass catchers that people like. And so you've got to hope that this is an offense that keeps the pedal down. Liam Cohen has been known to do that. And so I don't think it's ridiculous to project them to keep running a lot of plays, throwing a lot of passes, because he was a volume play last season. He was not a highly efficient passer. He was probably closer to average than above average in most passing metrics, but he threw the ball a ton and he generated a lot of fantasy points from that. And that's the case on him. I don't draft him at QB9 like at all. Brock Purdy goes after him. You could get Matt Stafford, MVP of the NFL last season. You could get Patrick Mahomes if you believe in the bounce back. You could get blanking Jared Goff. Can't believe I blanked on Jared Goff. Been in the year longer than like all of my nieces and nephews have been alive. And I can remember their names just fine. But the biggest knock I think I have on Trevor Lawrence, he starts the year with just a brutal 6-game stretch, playing Cleveland, Denver, and New England for the first 3 games of the season, which sounds really rough. I could talk myself into Denver a little bit because those are 2 offenses that want to run a lot of plays, but that's still a really tough defensive matchup. New England, we know how good New England's defense is. Cincinnati, week 4. Cincinnati might be a good defense. They might be bad again. They might just, I think the most likely result is their league average. And that would be a game where a lot of points hopefully get scored because it's two good offenses. But then right after that, Philadelphia Eagles and the Houston Texans. I don't think there's any quarterback that I will be less interested in based on the schedule than Trevor Lawrence. And that's something that really continues just throughout all of these guys. Bashal Tutin at RB25 has one of the best names at the running back position, but again, one of the worst schedules at the running back position. Cleveland and Denver to start off the year is such a brutal 1-2 punch, especially because we don't know what the Bashal Tutin role is. He showed us good things last season. He didn't show us a lot of explosive work. He didn't show us highly efficient work. I think it's fine because he was mostly used more of a short yardage area just to make up for one of Etienne's. I think that's how you pronounce it. I had someone who speaks French tell me how it's supposed to be pronounced. They could also just be lying. I have no idea. But Bashal Tutin was effective in the role that he was asked to do. And so the hope is that at running back 25, going at about 65th to 70th overall, he can get a bigger workload, he can get a bigger ask, and then continue to be successful in there. I worry that because he is too many people's big breakout sleeper pick at running back, that I'm not going to be able to get him on my team. The players who are going immediately after him include Justin Herbert, Tucker Kraft, Jadarian Price, who starts the year really nicely, Jalen Warren, a really good PPR floor type of running back, Aaron Rodgers check down machine, and then Harold Fannin Jr. as well, who I don't like his quarterback play, but he was incredible and a great volume option last season. And the quarterback play, despite being bad, he did have the same quarterback play last season. I don't think Bashal Tutin is meaningfully better than any of the players going behind him. So for me, he's just not a target. If you need a running back and he's kind of the last one on the board and Jadarian Price is gone and Jalen Warren's gone and you're just kind of looking at him or Tony Pollard, we'll rock with Tutin there. But he is a very sharp pick in the sense that it can go one way or another, and there's a lot more variance here. And for a stable running back, that's normally what I'm looking to draft as an RB2 to start off the year. I don't think he scratches that itch for me, especially with the schedule, which you hear me say for just about every Jacksonville Jaguar. Let's talk about wide receiver 30, Parker Washington, who is the highest drafted Jaguar right now. He had an incredible 7 carries last season for exactly 0 yards, which I thought was really awesome. He had 3 games with positive yardage, but his one game where he had like 4 carries for negative 10 yards just completely wiped it out. Thank you, Parker Washington, for making everyone's projections easier because you had 0 rush yards last season. After the bye week, Parker Washington was really good. You could tell he had learned a little bit from Gabe Davis, who was rostered by the Jaguars briefly over the last couple of years. He had 3 games below 8.5 points. All of his 6 other games after the bye were 17 PPR points or higher, which is very Gabe Davis-esque. He is a very popular breakout pick as well. My concern for all of the Bashal Tutin and Parker Washington and Trevor Lawrence breakout picks that fantasy people like, I mean, I know that's coming from a fantasy person, but this isn't my job. This is a hobby. It's a math problem. All right, if Bashal Tutin's going to be really good, Parker Washington, it's going to be hard for him to also be really good. Trevor Lawrence can be good with Parker Washington being good. That would be correlated, sure. But the biggest problem I have with all this is that Vegas is not nearly as in on this offense as the rest of the fantasy football community is. They have an implied point total equal to the Washington Commanders, tied at 16th in the NFL. It's expected to be an average offense, and an average offense that's as crowded as this one is doesn't make me very excited. Parker Washington's underlying data, on the other hand, is very good. He averaged 2.2 yards per route run, 0.1 first downs per route run. that is what you want to see before a breakout. People talk all the time about people earning targets. Players need to earn targets, they're not just given. He has shown that he is worth targets. It's just a question of, does the offense play fast enough and have the right game script for him to be targeted a lot? Because I'll tell you what, we'll go back here real quick to Trevor Lawrence playing week 1 against Cleveland. They don't have to throw the ball a lot against Cleveland. Cleveland might score 12 points against the Jaguars, who have a marginally improved defense, at least. Once the Jags take a 2-score lead, they're just probably going to be handing the ball off a lot. It's going to be an ugly game after the fact. Maybe they keep the pedal down. Maybe they just drop an insane number, but that's probably just a boring game. And they've probably got a handful of those coming up on their schedule against tough teams, against tough defenses, especially. If he's going to break out, he feels like it's more likely a second half of the season breakout. And then at that point, you've had the opportunity to pick him up off of waivers because, again, the early schedule is just so tough. And because there's so many names and mouths to feed in this offense, one of them being wide receiver 33, Brian Thomas Jr., who I don't like at all. Just not even close to a player that I'm drafting. When Trevor Lawrence was playing really good last season, Brian Thomas Jr. was at his absolute worst. He was not great as a rookie to start his career. Trevor Lawrence got hurt. Mac Jones came in. He was incredible with Mac Jones. He was not good to start the year with Trevor Lawrence, and that was when Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing as well. Then Trevor Lawrence started churning out 300-yard games with 4 touchdowns, and he was at his worst. That was the worst period of time to be Brian Thomas Jr. He led the NFL in drops. The team went out of their way at the trade deadline to acquire Jacoby Myers to add to this passing attack because apparently their first-round wide receiver, who had just come off a 1,000-yard season, wasn't getting it done for him anymore. I don't think that he is that bad of a player. Again, led the league in drops last year. I don't think that's very descriptive. Drops tend to be something that guys can work out in one off season. But this is a very crowded offense. And because he profiles to be a guy who works a lot more downfield, he profiles to be a very up and down type of player throughout the year. Wide receiver 33 as this is your wide receiver 2. All right, there's 36 at least starting wide receivers in a Guillotine league. I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. should be one of them. I don't have him ranked as one of them. He's maybe a boom-bust flex type of guy when you start getting into the low-end flex players who at that point, all of them can really dud, but Brian Thomas Jr. does have considerable upside week to week, and so I like him there. But to be my wide receiver 2 to start the season, you've got to do a lot to convince me of that one. One of the things you could do is you could roster Britton Strange going at tight end 18. I've already said all the same problems that I have with the rest of the Jaguars, crowded offense and a tough schedule. But he does do a nice job, hopefully, of rounding out the floor of your team. Because so many of these Jaguars are going late, I could see a world where you get Parker Washington and Brian Thomas Jr. back-to-back, and then anchor a tight end spot that had been empty with Britton Strange really late. That can work. You've got to hope that there's a lot of plays being run and they're catching a lot of passes. But what we saw from Britton Strange last season was fine. He tended to be between 8 and 17 PPR points. Reasonable floor for a tight end. No crazy ceiling, but you don't really need that. If you're looking for a crazy ceiling at tight end 18, your best hope is Taysom Hill unretires and he starts throwing the football around again. He's a good value at tight end 18. He is a good reason to not draft an early tight end, load up on other positions early, and then get this guy towards the end of your draft. He can give you functional games week 1 and probably going until the bye weeks start coming around and you've got 12 or 11 teams left in your league. Let's talk about some Jaguars scrubs who I've mentioned almost all of these guys at one point. First, Jacoby Myers going at wide receiver 44. I think this is an outright better player, and I have him ranked above Brian Thomas Jr. He was traded mid-season, and the numbers that he put up in Jacksonville were still pretty good. It's incredibly hard to be a wide receiver and be traded partway through the year and still perform very well. Outside of Devontae Adams, who was traded from the Raiders to the Jets, which is a completely different situation anyways, because he had already played with the offensive coordinator there and obviously had already played with Aaron Rodgers. This is Jacoby Myers coming in cold turkey, didn't even get a bye week to figure out the offense. They just threw him straight onto the field, and he caught on pretty quick. He was worse than Parker Washington during that stretch, but I think Jacoby Myers is probably the most consistent wide receiver out of those three. We know the most about Jacoby Myers. We've seen him play for a long time. He gets on the field. He stays on the field. He earns targets. He doesn't score touchdowns. That's fine. He's going to be a good safety blanket. He's going to line up on the outside. When the cornerback matchups get rough, you're not going to want to start him. But when he has a good matchup, you know what he's capable of. I like Jacoby Myers just fine. Again, don't like the schedule, but I can work with Jacoby Myers. He's a guy who I want to pair up with Parker Washington if I'm drafting somewhere close to a turn, and I can secure the pair of them. I think that's probably going to be 40 to 50% of the team's passing production week to week. So let's talk about RB43, Chris Rodriguez, who is probably a functional late running back pick. This is oh no, I messed up and didn't really draft a second wide receiver. I'll take Chris Rodriguez. He's fine. I think it's a little bit too pricey for me, but he probably has a defined week one role. He is a good yards after contact back. He is a good EPA per play back, if you believe in running back EPA per play, which even if you don't, Liam Cohen has outright said that and I'm getting this from Coach Speak Index, which is an awesome follow. He said that he values running backs with good yards after contact per carry and good EPA per rush. And then, like a month later, he said, Chris Rodriguez is a guy that we went out and targeted because he has both of those things. So I think he's going to see the field. Not enough for me to be super worried about Bashal Tutin, who I think is obviously the better individual talent. But Rodriguez is going to produce some things, and you could talk yourself into him falling into the end zone week one. Again, at RB43, you're drafting him to start, but you're not expecting much out of him. That's the right range for a Chris Rodriguez. And now we've got to talk about the second overall pick in last year's draft, Travis Hunter, who was you can't start the guy. You can't draft the guy. You can't start the guy. They're going to draw stuff up for him, and it's going to make you really frustrated when Travis Hunter catches a touchdown and not Parker Washington or Jacoby Myers or maybe even a Brenton Strange, because no one's going to be starting Travis Hunter. He's not going to have the week-to-week volume. It seems that they very clearly need him more at cornerback. He's probably their second best cornerback. Maybe they keep him in the nickel, but they've got three better wide receivers than him. Just outright three guys who two of them have had 1,000-yard seasons in their careers, and both of those guys are not being thought of as highly as the third guy. So the Travis Hunter dynasty owners are in shambles. They've always been in shambles, and they're going to remain in shambles for several years. Don't draft that guy. That's just another waste of a guillotine draft pick. You can do something better with that pick. Speaking of wastes of a guillotine draft pick, let's talk about CJ Stroud, who's just been rough as a fantasy asset. He's probably been a better real-life quarterback than fantasy quarterback. I'll give that to him. He only had 3 games as a QB1 last season, and that's QB1 as in like a top 12 quarterback. Those 3 games came against the Baltimore Ravens, who at the time were abysmal in the secondary, the Arizona Cardinals, who need no introduction, and the San Francisco 49ers in the middle of the season when it was Mac Jones and a bunch of dudes off the street starting. He topped 300 yards once last season. Part of this is because the defense is still really good, They kind of doubled down on the defense in the draft too. I know that they took offensive line early, but then they went back and they went with Caden McDonald to hold it down on the defensive interior. The offensive line play should improve, as we saw it improve throughout the season. A similar gripe that I had to Daniel Jones throwing to his first read all the time. CJ Stroud did the same thing. He had the third highest first read throw rate in the NFL last season. I like that he has a haircut. I think that probably improves his prospects. I want that. I want to be looking at him with the haircut on my team. I feel like there's a little bit more, he looks more confident. He looks older and more mature. It looks like he can inspire some of the other players on my bench when I accidentally auto draft him. Let's stop talking about him. Let's talk about running back 23, David Montgomery, who after 15 point per game seasons in back-to-back years, he was below 10 points per game, 9.5 last season. That was a lot of it being they stopped throwing it to him as much. And also, it was just Jahmyr Gibbs time. And we won't talk a ton about Jahmyr Gibbs here. He was still a really good rusher. He was 4.5 yards per carry. He didn't run a lot of routes, so we didn't get a chance to see how efficient he was going to be as a pass catcher. I know it sounds crazy, but the Texans' offensive line might be an improvement over what the Lions trotted out there last year. And that's because the Texans just had an all-new offensive line last season. All 5 of their week 1 starters were new guys, or maybe not all the week 1 starters, but they have a completely new offensive line relative to 2 years ago when the line was really horrendous. And that's also a unit that has had more time to gel together. He's going in between the 50s and 70s basically on every site. And that's the range where there's a lot of up and down picks. You've got the Tucker Kraft, Christian Watson type guys. You got Jameson Williams in there. You've got a handful of, there's Kyle Pitts happening in there as well. I should have went ahead and pulled up this ADP for this particular part. Point is, though, where he's going, there are a lot of real question marks basically at every position. And I think we know most of what we're getting out of David Montgomery. I like him at RB23. I'm not excited about him at RB23, but I think he's going to be able to hold down the fort for the first 8 or so weeks of the season and give you the opportunity to find someone who is better at football than David Montgomery. Because you can, and I bet you will if you're alive by then. And our next wide receiver is Nico Collins, who I just outright did not do the notes on. These are not Nico Collins notes. These are Chris Olave notes. My bad. Look, it happens. It's a long off season. We're getting started. We're getting back into it. He's going at wide receiver 9 right now. This is a very similar problem to what we talked about in a previous episode. We were talking about Jalen Waddle, where I just worry that the defense might be too good for him to get a lot of run. And as much as I like Nico Collins as a player, that does concern me. I think wide receiver 9 is a reasonable value. I'm more so taking running backs there just because of guys like Josh Downs, like Jaden Reed, who you can get later in PPR leagues who are going to be able to do better things for your roster than the running backs that you're getting at around those picks. And so just because there's really good running backs going around Nico Collins, I don't find myself with Nico Collins at all yet this year. But we know that this is still a guy in the prime of his career. He was hurt for a little bit last season. He came back. It didn't look like he had really missed a step. He's going around guys like A.J. Brown right now. I would definitely take him over A.J. Brown. We know that they both have a pretty similar situation. I like A.J. Brown's quarterback more, but also A.J. Brown's almost 30. I want to say A.J. Brown's 29 years old. Nico Collins is still in his physical prime, or at least what should be his physical prime. And so if you're taking wide receiver towards the top, I like Nico Collins just fine, especially because the other pass catchers in this offense are really easy for you to draft. Jaden Higgins going at wide receiver 50, I think is a really good value as the third Jaden off the board, going behind Daniels and Reed right now. He's, I think, a pretty good separator. He is more of the Nico Collins archetype than he is one of the slot sort of guys. But I fear the slot role gets divvied up between Tank Dell and Jalen Knoll. And so I like Jaden Higgins to be the guy opposite of Nico, especially in heavy personnel packages. If they get a second tight end or a second back onto the field, Higgins should be the other guy at the wide receiver position. I think that that's an offense that wants to play heavier. The better your defense is, the heavier you want to play. And the heavier an offense plays, the better it is for the wide receivers that are on the field. Because if you're going to go from a heavy personnel set to drop back into a pass, the wide receivers are better to target than the tight ends or the running backs. And so if he's on the field for that, which I think most people in the Texans organization are expecting him to be, he's going to be a pretty good pick. I like him a lot, especially if I've already drafted Nico Collins. You're getting the majority of a passing game with the two of them. This is a quiet pick. Not a lot of people are talking about Jaden Higgins. I think that a year two player who was a talented rookie and flashed good things for us is pretty reasonable at wide receiver 50. You may not even have to start the guy week one. If you have an early pick, this could be the top of your bench type of guy. Good profile, good pick. There's other guys in the range that you might like more, but if you're drafting with smart people and they've taken all of those guys, perfectly happy with Higgins at wide receiver 50. Dalton Schultz, similar to Jaden Higgins, he's a much better and much safer pick if you've already taken Nico Collins. He has the most Jewish-sounding name in the NFL, but is actually Mormon, which leads me to believe there may be more to Dalton Schultz than meets the eye, both as a player and as a person. He is not a week one streamer. I don't remember the matchup. He has a bad matchup week one. Week two, he does happen to play the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the worst linebackers in the NFL. They were terrible against tight ends last season, historically so. Genuinely, through 14 weeks of the NFL season, they looked like the tight end one against the Bengals was having like an average Rob Gronkowski season, which is kind of awesome or kind of terrible. So he's going to be a week two start him or sit him. He's going to be on the stardom list for me. I'll tell you that right now. You don't even have to tune into that show. You should anyways. He was a lot better after the bye. It looked like they didn't want him involved at first. Then Nico Collins got hurt, and the offense was a little abysmal. And then Nico Collins came back. They went into the bye week. They retooled some things. They decided they need to throw to Dalton Schultz more. He wasn't especially consistent, but you're not drafting anyone at tight end 20 who's going to be especially consistent. This is solid tight end depth. There's nothing wrong with taking him at tight end 20. There's other players I'm more excited about, but if you don't want to scroll and if you want more tight end depth, that's a good pick. Let's talk about Jalen Knoll and Tank Dell, who I already mentioned, both very slotty guys, and I worry that they're going to both struggle to take over from one another. I like Tank Dell to take over more than Jalen Knoll. I would outright rather draft Tank Dell, who's going about 10 picks behind Jalen Knoll. He's a guy you want to root for. He's not a guy that you have to start. And we've seen him be more talented than most of the guys going around him. And you're going to be able to find out pretty fast if Tank Dell is worth a spot on your roster. For now, though, Jalen Knoll is kind of just a thorn in the side. I think he's better than I would like him to be for the sake of the other guys on the roster. If someone gets hurt, he's a much better name to know. And if Tank Dell isn't right, then Jalen Knoll becomes a good pick. But right now, we don't know what the situation on Dell is. And the last thing I'll say on Jalen Knoll is some teams are really good at covering slot receivers. Some teams aren't. If the Texans are playing a team that can't really cover slot receivers and that team happens to be good at scoring points, I would be interested in starting Jalen Knoll. But probably not a draft pick. Probably a guy who you're going to be able to pick up when that week rolls around, when you know, okay, this might be Jalen Knoll week. And if it's ever Jalen Knoll week for you, you have messed up. I'm just saying that right now. If I'm looking at you and you're in the DMs or if you're in the email and we're talking start sit, And if our decision is Jalen Knoll, something has gone seriously wrong throughout your season. And if you get eliminated, it's not my fault. Respectfully. Love you all. Wide receiver 45, Woody Marks. Just real quick before we move on to the Tennessee Titans, who I'm going to fall asleep while I talk about. We saw David Montgomery be a workhorse when he was in Chicago. And then he left, and they immediately drafted one of the best, if not the best, running backs in the NFL on top of them. David Montgomery might be a workhorse. David Montgomery might not be a workhorse. If he's not a workhorse, Woody Marks is a pretty great fit. If he is a workhorse, you can still get good value out of Woody Marks as a pass catcher because David Montgomery wasn't an excellent pass catcher last season. That might not be something he truly struggles with. That might have been a one-off. No way of knowing until we see it on the field, unfortunately. But at RB 45, I think there are better values at running back than Woody Marks. He's a perfectly fine, acceptable pick. If you've already drafted Montgomery and you want to add Marks to it because you think this is going to be a run-heavy team, which I do, and I think most people would imagine this is a run-heavy team, just pairing up the top two running backs there, making one of them your RB2, one of them your flex, pretty reasonable. I would be on board with that. And that's about where you draft a player like that, would be RB 45. Let's talk about the Titans, and then I'm going to eat dinner. QB 24, Cam Ward. He has to improve so much to be remotely startable in anything that resembles a guillotine format, outside of like if you're playing Superflex, which I will be. I will be playing one Guillotine Superflex league. If you're interested in that league, I should have plugged this at the beginning of the episode. But if you're interested in that league, please let me know. Please come find me on Twitter. I will get you on the short list to play in that league, and it's going to be a fun time. But that's the only way you're starting Cam Ward. You have to hope that Brian Dable either makes him way better immediately, or Brian Dable decides, Cam, we are running the ball, and you are running the ball. I don't find it that likely. He's a big enough guy it could work. But at QB 24, you're still passing up decent depth at other positions. You could be taking a guy like Devon Vele, who with the Jordan Tyson news becomes a really great guillotine pick. You could take basically any backup running back there. You might at some point during the year pick him up and stream him during bye weeks, but I just don't see a world where someone drafts Cam Ward and Cam Ward stays on their team until week 8. Cam Ward's going to be one of the first players that gets cut because you're going to be looking at your bench and you're going to be like, I'd rather have this backup running back just in case Christian McCaffrey or Jonathan Taylor get hurt than Cam Ward, who's going to score like 14 points at quarterback and maybe just have an explosion in a bad way. I don't even have a good intro to Tony Pollard. I almost yawned saying Tony Pollard. Look, this is a volume play. He's going to RB29. He's the last remotely viable volume play, unless you're a big Jonathan Brooks truther, which maybe, but there's still a lot of projection going on in the Jonathan Brooks camp. There's not a lot of projection happening with Tony Pollard. He's a fine running back on a not good team that just doesn't run the ball enough. He's always on the field. He gets the vast majority of the carries. They're just losing games a lot very fast. He was generally between 7 and 11 PPR points. You want to draft your team in a way where you don't end up taking Tony Pollard. He is at the end of the tier of guys who are clearly it's their backfield. But he's still not that good. Like the difference between Tony Pollard and like a Rico Dowdle probably isn't a ton, even though there's a round or two in guillotine separating them. I would much rather have filled my running back positions earlier in the draft, and I do my very best to make sure I fill my running back positions earlier in the draft, than need to draft Tony Pollard. At that point, I would probably, depending on what the board looks like, I would probably ignore him in favor of the Josh Downs or Wan'Dale Robinsons or Brock Purdy if I don't have a quarterback, and just wait even longer at running back. Because I think at RB29, anyone past RB29 isn't a meaningful difference maker. We don't have any reason to believe that they're going to be remotely consistent. I don't believe that for Pollard. I don't believe that for any running back in this range. And at that point, I would rather just wait. Give me like a Jadon Blue, who I think can catch a lot of passes, really Samaje Perine his way into something. Honestly, yeah, speaking of another pick I don't like at all, wide receiver 30, Carnell Tate, that you are expecting way too much out of Carnell Tate. You were expecting it way too early as well. I'd be happy to be wrong, but this just is not the sort of profile that I want to draft to score points for me immediately. All 10 of the guys going 10 spots after him, I would rather have than Carnell Tate. I'll give you these names. Jaylen Warren, Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., Ramondre Stevenson, Chris Godwin, Dak Prescott, definitely. DK Metcalf, Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is the one that's kind of a toss-up, but I like his target opportunity more, so I would still take Kyle Pitts over Carnell Tate. Josh Downs, obviously. Sam Laporta, absolutely. And those are the guys going 10-plus picks after Carnell Tate. Jaylen Warren, the first guy on that list, goes 10 picks after Carnell Tate. This is way too high to be taking a rookie who is mostly a downfield guy, who we have questions about the quarterback, who we have questions about the offensive line, who we have questions about the coach, and the guy who they just paid a ton of money to, who the coach has given 140 targets to in back-to-back seasons. Wide receiver 40, Wan'Dale Robinson, is going way after him. He is a PPR scam. He's a cheat wide receiver who is much better for fantasy football than he is for real life football. I don't especially care. I want him on my team. I think that this is a much better safety blanket. What we saw out of Cam Ward last year was a lot of plays that broke down and Cam Ward trying to find someone open. The open guy is more likely to get thrown to close to Cam Ward, Wan'Dale Robinson, than the Carnell Tate, who might be open, but also might be too far downfield, and half the time is just going to be on the wrong side of the field. If the route is on the right side of the field and Ward gets flushed out to the left, you can't throw that to Carnell Tate. You can't throw it back across your body 30 yards. You're not in a video game. You're not 2018 Patrick Mahomes. It's just Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be underneath. It's going to be somewhat open, and he's going to get a frustrating amount of targets. We're going to look up one month into the season, and we're going to go, why does Wan'Dale Robinson have so many more points than Carnell Tate? Because that's just how this is going to start. Carnell Tate, who is a very good player, even in college, and I get that he had a really great talent around him, but he wasn't a great target earner in college. He was a downfield guy, and he's very important to this Titans offense. He was a very good NFL draft pick, and he's going to be a great real-life NFL player. But for this particular game, that's not a pick I want to make. Give me Wan'Dale Robinson. Give me the guy who he could separate. He was good against man. He was good against zone. Despite all the volume, he still had 1.88 yards per out run, which isn't great. It's top 30, though. And he's more of a PPR pick for sure, but he's the veteran who they paid a lot of money to and the coach has familiarity with, and he's been in the building longer. He's had more opportunity to work with Cam Ward than Carnell Tate has. I'm just taking, and this is going to be on an article that I'm putting out on Player Profiler here in a couple of weeks, hopefully, about the dichotomy between those two guys and the difference between like a redraft or a best ball type of draft pick and a guillotine draft pick where you're really just focused on the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. Wan'Dale is just probably going to be better in the first 6 to 8 weeks. Gunnar Helm. I don't care. This is tight end 24. At that point, they're kind of all the same. Pick your flavor. If you like Gunnar Helm, go for it. Probably a floor raiser if you also draft Wan'Dale, but not someone you're targeting. That's more of someone that just kind of falls onto your lap. Let's talk about some scrubs and get out of here. We've got running back 46, Tyjae Spears, who has never topped 10 points without a touchdown. He also has 2 fewer ACLs than I do, which is impressive. He's probably going to eke out a few PPR points because Tony Pollard isn't a great pass catcher, and the offense is going to be in hurry-up mode a lot. Reasonable at RB46. I guess I would narrowly prefer him to Woody Marks, who I just talked about at RB45, but that is splitting hairs to the splittiest of hairs. Wide receiver 73, Calvin Ridley, who I can't decide if he's washed or not. I think that there's just too much competition for me to be super interested in Calvin Ridley. That said, if I'm wrong about Wan'Dale Robinson, Calvin Ridley is probably the reason why. It's probably not Carnell Tate demanding a 30-ish% target share to start his NFL career. It's probably Calvin Ridley has resurgence. I don't expect it. He didn't top 8 PPR points at all last season, except for one game. He only played 6 games, so you give and you take there. He still had over 2 yards per route run, which is pretty good for any wide receiver, especially someone as old as Calvin Ridley. The offense was kind of broken. Again, it's really hard to know if Calvin Ridley's washed or not. This is a guy that we're going to know week 1. At wide receiver 73, there's just a lot more exciting picks that you can make. And if Calvin Ridley becomes like 8 or 9 guaranteed PPR points a game as your, last flex, I think that's less valuable than if someone going in that range is more of an up and down guy. Anyone who's your last flex is not good enough to always get you 8 or 9 points, even Calvin Ridley if he has a rebound. But Calvin Ridley isn't a guy who can save your week. There are guys going at wide receiver 73 who can just outright save your season with a big play, a big explosive week when the coverage and when everything lines up for it. Last guy we're going to talk about before getting you out of here, running back 63, Nicholas Singleton, is utterly undraftable. I see him get drafted in every draft I'm in. I don't care. I might not rank him when I do my Fantasy Pros rankings coming out here pretty soon. He's going to RB63. He's an injury away from being an injury away, which is one of the worst situations a running back can find themselves in, especially on an offense like this. Negative interest in this guy. I've said it about a lot of players on the show. I'll say it about Nick Singleton too. By the time that Nick Singleton is reasonably startable in fantasy football, your Guillotine League is going to be way too small for him to be startable in that league. The thesis on Nick Singleton is he slowly chips away at Tyjae Spears, takes over the Tyjae Spears role, and then Tony Pollard, who's older, gets injured, and Nick Singleton finally comes in to the limelight. At that point, just draft TJ Giddens, who goes 2 rounds later than Nick Singleton and only needs 1 injury, and that injury can come at any time in the year, and then he can become a smash pick. Singleton is only up here because dynasty guys like him, which is fair. I think he's a good talent, but this isn't a guy who's going to have a hot start to the year. And at RB63, that's mostly what you're drafting. You're looking for guys who might start hot because someone else lost out on a good season. And that's all we're going to talk about today, because I don't want to talk about any more AFC South players. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will, in fact, have Cancel Loop on. That'll be coming out next Monday. And stay tuned for an article that will be coming out. It will be my first piece of paid fantasy football content, which I'm very excited about. It'll be on playerprofiler.com. I'll be putting that out on my Twitter as well. I'll be plugging it the next couple of shows that I do probably as well. But definitely give that a look. You're hopefully everyone enjoys it. But with that, thank you all very much for watching and listening. We'll catch you next time on the Don't Get Last Guillotine podcast.